All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third and final artist conversation in the Building Intersectional Disability Communities Through Art and Conversation series. Tonight, we have two phenomenal artist activists who will showcase their masterpieces and talk about the celebration of having multiple identities, such as disability, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, and more. This conversation comes at a great time, considering that this month is LGBT plus Pride Month. Next month is Disability Pride Month, including the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. This Friday is Autistic Pride Day, and this Saturday is Juneteenth, also known as Black Independence Day. Before I, before I go further into explaining the purpose behind the series and the agenda for tonight, I would like to spend a few moments talking about the two artists. Washieka Torres is a disability rights scholar, activist, and documentarian. She is from the South Bronx in New York City and is currently a fourth-year PhD student in the Disability Studies program at UIC. She is a documentarian, researcher, and public speaker. Her scholarly area looks at the intersection of food sovereignty and disability. She explores the ways in which society culturally and socioeconomically restricts the representation of disabled people to have been seen as active food shoppers and food makers rather than passive food consumers. She does this by mapping disabled food ways in order to look at the ways these barriers shape the food options disabled people have and the choices they make. Her work is also justice oriented as she works to create a more food just society by centering the needs and wants of disabled people in solving issues around food access, wellness, and food autonomy. Her current project focuses on disabled cooking methods, meaning, and knowledge translation. Cathy Saunders was born in Chicago, weird on the South Side, educated in the Chicago public school system, and continued her educational goals at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. An avid reader, she developed an interest in writing and later a talent for poetry. She nurtured her need for self expression and honed a passion for both written and spoken word through performance. Kathy has been a mentor with Access Living Mentor Mentee Role Model Program and is a strong advocate for people with disabilities, women and girls in particular. In addition, Kathy has been very active as a self advocate in the anti violence work locally and nationally through Illinois Imagines Chicago, the statewide Illinois Imagines Project, Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority, and the Vera Institute of Justice. helping to educate women with disabilities in the prevention of sexual and domestic violence. She was featured in a 2019 video series by Newsy on sex, love, and life, navigating womanhood with disabilities. Cathy published her first book of poetry in 2019. My name is Cathy Lynn, a love letter from me to you. So now I will bring up the purpose behind this series. The Building Intersectional Disability Communities Through Art and Conversation series is 3 weeks long and we'll cover 3 topics that are tied to disability, race, and intersectionality. This week's topic is about celebrating the intersecting identities of race, disability, gender, and the LGBT plus community. This is also the last week of the conversation series. There is also an opportunity this Saturday where you could create art based on this week's topic, in which we will talk about in further detail after the presentation and the conversation. This series is made possible by the Healing Illinois Grant, which supports works by community organizations who are creating spaces for people in communities to engage in racial healing in the aftermath of racial tensions that took place in 2020 and continuing to this day. In tonight's event, we will split it into 2 parts. The first portion will consist of the 2 artists presenting their work, each for up to 10 minutes. Afterwards, we'll open it up for a discussion between the moderator, Jajin Pak, and Washieka and Cathy. Jajin will ask a few questions to the artists, but this will be the time where you can ask them questions. Any questions that you want to ask them. So before we go any further, we'd like to discuss a few community agreements for the discussion portion. They are as follows. When the artists are presenting or when the discussion is taking place, please remember to mute your mics out of respect for the artists who are featured tonight. Feel free to type in your questions or comments in the chat. Jay Rhonda, or myself, or any of the IDHD folks will field questions for the chat box. You may also use the raise hand feature to ask to speak if you would like to comment verbally. Note that we may not get to everyone's questions due to time constraints, but don't worry, however. We'll do our best to ensure that everyone will have the chance to speak up and speak out. Everyone, we are now at the point where our featured artists will give their presentation on their works. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation and discussions. And now I hand it over to Washieka and Cathy.
Hello, Washieka, would you like to go first?
No, you can go first. That's fine. No worries.
Okay.
I feel like I've seen you somewhere and I'm really excited to hear you speak.
I feel the same way. I'm excited about you as well. So I don't know if my presentation is going to take a full 10 minutes. I prepared one poem and it's from my book. The title of my book is My Name is Cathy Lynn, a love letter from me to you. And the book can be found on Amazon under books, under poetry. It's under women's poetry, under ethnicity. So I'm going to read the poem from page 52 of the book entitled Forget Not. From the ashes of the earth, rise, spirit, rise. Awaken from your slumber, soul, arise. Corruption rules the universe, rejoicing at our demise. Yet, from the ashes of the earth, soul shall arise. The world, in spite of darkness, holds pictures of light within its skies, refusing to succumb to the darkness. Darkness doesn't know it yet, but the stars illuminate the night. Our Creator calls to the darkness saying, let there be light. Light from the ashes of the earth. Barren, desolate wasteland where nothing seems to grow. Love carefully. From the ashes of the earth, well springs of life rivers flow. Rivers of creativity, rivers of tenacity, rivers of strength birthed in turbulence, conceived in the struggle of humankind. Arise from the ashes of the earth. Do you see the beauty of the ashes? In the vastness of tiny specks of dirt, of dust, we live. Yet, from the ashes, we are free to be. What shall I be? What am I but a particle of insignificance? Or so you think. Think again. Forget not what rises from the ashes. Thank you. I prepared that one poem, and I've never done anything like this before, so what would the next step be? To speak on the poem or to turn the microphone over to Washieta?
Hi, Cathy. Thank you for that. This is Jay Jin. If you like to speak a little bit about your poem, that would be fine. Or if you would like, you could also turn it over to Washieta. It's your call.
I would like to turn it over to Washieta and experience her artistry and then do questions later. And thank
Wonderful.
you.
Hi everyone, this is Washieka, actually with a K at the end, not a D. But this is Washieka, and so a lot of my art actually takes very different forms. And so I actually gave a presentation recently where I talked about food as art and activism. And for me, one moment. Whew. Sorry, I've had a lot of doctor's appointments. So I've had a very long day. But I've a lot of the work I do around community work, and right now, what I actually do is every week I cook meals for 4 families in Chicago. And for me, part of the process is an art, right? The process of making food and the presentation of it. And I don't just mean the end product, but I actually take step-by-step photos of the food that I do in case people have questions, and I try to describe them as best I can so that if people want to make these recipes, they can. And for me, part of it is the full incorporation of my body as kind of a tool or a vehicle to create this art. So that's kind of one aspect of it. Like, for instance, this week I'm making salmon croquettes. I'm actually making it not from a can, which is really traditional, and I can actually hear the can. You know, my mother opening the can of salmon. I can hear her rifling through it to make sure it's clean and cracking the eggs and measuring the flour and hitting it against the bowl, and the way the spoon scrapes as she mixes it, and the smells and how the smell changes while she's cooking it, and her chopping the onions and making all the different foods, and the smell of just the overwhelming smell of canned salmon to the overwhelming aroma of the entire meal, including buttered rice and peas with a lot of pepper. That's something that my mother really likes and I've grown to love too. And so it's not just about the end result, but it's about how you feel and how your body moves and shifts and changes, and how the food changes as well. The ways the textures change when you break down a whole onion into cubes, or when you mince it, or something like that. So for me, food is definitely one of those things where not just the end product is beautiful or smells good or feels good and is an art, but the entire process. And when I was younger, I actually was in an art major in high school, industrial design. So it was designing for, consumers. And one of the things I really loved about the art was actually being able to feel the textures of the paint. So if you're using tempera paint, or if you're using different types of techniques to create art. And I wanted to find a way to take those experiences and incorporate them into my everyday life and make them more apparent or evident or interactive. So I've actually been working on a Black home decor line. A lot of my pieces are still being prepped because I work in wood, unfinished wood pieces. And so there's an entire process for you there too. There's the process of painting on the, actually have some primer on my hands actually, but painting on the various layers to protect the wood, making sure that certain feelings are just right, the temperature in the room, and how you hold something, how you dry it, the types of brushes you use. I actually pick the brushes I use by how they feel and how I think they're going to feel brushing against the wood. And that feeling of creation and creativity is really amazing. But it's not just that for me. I also want the user to have an experience as they're using my home decor product. So for instance, I'm going to make a tray, but you're still going to feel kind of the wood grains in it, as opposed to a lot of mass manufactured home decor, which is very smooth and has these seamless lines, and you don't fully interact with it. Maybe you look at it, and maybe that look evokes some kind of emotion, but I also want people to feel it and interact with it in more than just one way, maybe a textural kind of way. So I actually have some things I'm also working on. So this is one thing that has been finally, you can't fully tell, obviously, that it's been fully prepped, because most of the prep products I use are clear depending on the type of paint I'm using. If I'm using glitter, which is another type of texture experience, fine glitter versus chunky glitters, and how those are incorporated, the sounds of making art as well are really important to me. But for this, I'm actually going to be decorating it, not with these pearls. I'm actually going to show you some pearls and gemstones. And so I have a wooden block. It is a cube. It's about 2 inches cubed, because it's 2 inches all around. And what I'll be using these for are actually making sim toys with, and I'll show you in a moment, these pearls. So I have this one is about a white pearlescent half pearl, and it has a smooth texture, but they come in different sizes. I actually want to show you a different size. And when you rub your hand against them together, it creates quite a soothing, pretty quiet textural experience that is quite calming. And so I want to add that to wood toys. I know that there are some sim cubes that make noise and they have clicks and dials and buttons, but I wanted something that someone could possibly use, whether they wanted it to make noise or not. You can rub it against surfaces, but you can also just rub it have it in the palm of your hand and rub it. And one side will just be flat or flat-ish, and you'll still feel the grains of the wood and the way the primer goes onto it. And then the other ones will have pearls, or one moment. There's also matching rhinestones. So I have 2 pearlescent white rhinestones here. Actually, these are the same size. Let me get 2 different sizes. And they will also give you a smooth-esque textural experience, because these are faceted. They're not smooth, like the half pearl. So you will get a different textural experience when you're touching them. Let me just close this back up because I do not want these thousands of pearls to escape. I will also be working with other types of art. So I don't have all the rhinestones I'm using now, but for instance, I have this one, which is a transparent AB. So AB stands for Aurora Borealis, and it gives you a kind of rainbow effect, and it's in the shape of a teardrop. So again, it's another textural experience that will be compounded by the different textural experience of the wood I'm working on, and a different experience because these are plastic or resin than the material of the wood itself. So the reason I'm creating this is, one, because I do want the work the work that I create to be interactive, and I want people to be able to touch it and see it. So I do think there'll be an aesthetic to it, but I also want that textural experience as well, because I think it is really important to, and I think to me it's in a way pushing against this quote unquote uniformity, or supposed uniformity, or forced uniformity of the way certain home decor things are supposed to look. And so for me, creating this not only as a black, as a black disabled woman, I think that it's really important for me to see the things that I think about, the things that I want others to have, and things that I've had discussions with people about. I've made other types of work like this before, and people admire it, but I also want them to be able to interact with it. And I think that your home as a space should not be stagnant. It should be a place where you can interact with the things and engage with the things in your home. And I really enjoy being able to do that. Both, like I said, I do it with food, but I also love being able to do that now with home decor things. And I want to share that experience, beyond the families that I feed. I want to be able to share this textural, sensorial experience with users and people who want to have these pieces in their homes. So that's kind of my kind of take on that. And I also think starting a black home decor line is semi-revolutionary. And it will incorporate the aspects and elements of my identity, because I'm an Afro-Latina. So I will also have aspects of that in my work. And I want people to see themselves in that in all ways, and feel themselves in that as well. So they'll be able to, like I said, feel the work and, kind of experience the work as well. So that's my little thing.
Wow. Hi, everybody. This is Jajin. Thank you so much, Cathy. And thank you so much, Washieka, for your just very different creative artistic expressions. And I've had the pleasure of being part of these conversations, and I am so grateful for this opportunities, because it has given me, and I'm sure everyone who's attended these conversations, the opportunity to learn, and for each of us to expand our idea of what art is. For me, for a long time, I had this kind of idea, I always connected art with either literature or paintings or music and maybe a little bit of dance. But hearing, just hearing your passion and your energy around sculpture and crafts and food and just kind of how you find ways of mingling all of that, Washieka, was really eye-opening for me, and kind of helped me to see things in a broader way. And Cathy, I've known you for a few years, and I've had the privilege and the pleasure of witnessing your poetry and the power of your words, and how you craft words to tell a story and to communicate feeling and an experience, and to raise people's spirits, as well as help them connect to important issues such as gender-based violence awareness and supporting survivors, and just connecting all of that to our disability community as well. So enough of me kind of speaking for a second. I have, again, this is Jajin. I have the great pleasure of asking or kind of interviewing the both of you for a few minutes, for the next 10 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes, so that we have a chance to get to know you a little bit more, and kind of explore a little bit, if you, as much as you're comfortable sharing, about your journey to your art and your creativity. So the first question is simply to ask each of you to share a little bit more about yourselves. And can you talk about your journey to how you came to your art, your various creative methods? So Cathy, as a writer, as a poet, as spoken word, and Washieka, to your unique creative energies of food and cooking and using sculpture and materials. And if I can, I'm going to ask Cathy if you can start.
I'm so sorry. I keep forgetting to unmute myself. I started as a poet when I needed to have an escape from, of course, growing up with a disability in childhood, and you're being teased, and all the negative experiences that we go through. Poetry was a solace for me, because the one thing that I loved about the blank page, and this is before the days of computer, is that the blank page does not criticize, it does not dehumanize, it's just sitting there waiting for you to create on it. So it's like a welcome friend. And I started writing in childhood, and I was the kind of kid that I heard music in nature. Like, I could listen to the rippling of the water, or the sound of the rain, or the sound of the wind, or just watching birds in motion. And I would be thinking, where are they going, or what's happening up there? So I wanted a way to express those thoughts, and I found that poetry was a very cathartic type of genre to express. It's very cleansing, very healing. If you're having a rough day or a bad day, it's just very, very introspective to go inside of yourself and see what's there. And I discovered that I liked the sensory perception of using taste, smell, touch, what you see and what you hear, as sensory for words.
Thank you, Cathy. Washieka?
I think in regards to both of the arts, I think there's this expression of these ideas that I really want to get out. But I think a big thing is people believing in you. So I actually, when I was a little kid, had an easy bake oven. And I would also always watch cooking shows. So like on channel 13 or 21, or like free, free public television. And one time I got this easy bake oven, and instead of making what was the standard mix, I kind of added my own things, and like no one wanted to try it. They were like, no, this is not these weren't the instructions. And I said, no, because I didn't like it. It looked bland, it looked boring, and it was flat, and it didn't have much zest to it. And so I just added these things I thought would be really great, these smells or things that I like to taste. And so one of my neighbors actually tasted it. It was this little tiny little pan the size of maybe a petri dish of food, and he loved it, and he was like, oh my god, this is really good, and he like ate enthusiastically. And so I was like, you know what, that I like it and someone else likes it, and it was a really great encouragement for me to keep going and keep working with my craft. And just thinking about, wow, what tastes go together, what tastes don't, what textures go together. So I like certain textures, like a lot of people don't like okra, but the reason people don't like okra is the reason I like okra. Or what sensations do you get? What flavors? How do you build flavors? And kind of looking at different cuisines and their ideas of what a good meal is or what good taste is. And so all of that, just immersing myself in that and just finding ways to either make something that I just saw in my head or something I saw and I was like, oh, I wonder what that would taste like with this or with that. Or how this acidic thing works with something that's sweet or things like that. And so that was just that kind of experimentation in the kitchen. And thankfully, it's been more good than bad. I mean, I've had some failures. There have been some things I don't show people, recipes I think I'll be working on for the rest of my life, and things I don't cook with. Like, I don't cook with tilapia. For some reason, it just doesn't work out for me. It's one of my nemesis. Also, bay scallops, the little tiny ones, never work out for me. But that kind of learning a craft, and being loosely guided by others and also encouraged by others. I like posting when I was on Facebook a lot. I liked posting my recipes and I liked telling people about the process of making them. Some of them remind me of my family members and the food they cooked, and I feel connected to my community and to my ancestors. And so that's really how the food portion came about. And funny enough, like I did industrial design in high school, but I applied to art school and didn't get in because they said my portfolio wasn't broad enough. I focused a lot on patterns. I love patterns and I love the thinking about the textures that certain patterns would have. Like, what texture would a beehive have if I was designing this beehive and I made it from different materials? And so I didn't, right? And so I went into other majors, I went into other things. But again, I was thinking about, oh man, I would love to just paint a wooden box. And my sister visited me and while I was in Chicago, and I was just seeing all this beautiful Black art that I now have in my home, beautiful, just these beautiful things. And I said, I want to contribute to that. I want to be a part of the community when people look up or around, or but not just looking, right? There's not just that. I don't just want art that is stagnant on my shelves and looks nice and I can tell people about. I want something I can interact with. So I made this box and it was based on missing home and missing 5 points. So I made it look a little like spray paint and I did certain effects to it. And you can still feel the texture of the wood, which was really important for me. And people just loved it. And that was another bit of encouragement to keep me going. And so I think about all of the dreams and ideas that I have around colors and beautiful bright metallics and shimmers and the way those feel, right? What does a metallic gold feel like versus look like? Or what do these what do these rhinestones and cabochons and half pearls, what do they look like, but what do they feel like? How do they make you feel? How do you engage with them and feel a connection to yourself, to the things that you bought or made? And that's something that really keeps me going, and it helps me, that. And I always check in with people I've made. So I was making signs, and I checked in with my friends. I said, "What do you think of these colors? And what do you think of what I'm going to do to add a sensorial experience?" And they just loved it. And there's unique things I found, and when I tell my mother or show my mother something, she goes, "Oh my God, I would have never thought of that. That's amazing. Can you believe that?" Yeah, I was like, "Yeah, I'm thinking about this. And there's things I've never seen before. There's things I've only ever seen it. My sketches aren't that great, by the way, but there's only things I've ever seen. I've just written quick sketches down, and I'm like, in my head, there it is, and soon it will be out in the world for others to see too." And yeah, I just want people to see and rethink about their home in the ways that I like to interact and think about my home. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Thank you both for sharing that. And it's a great pleasure to kind of learn more about a little bit about your backgrounds and what drew you to your art, and just hearing your connection and your passion for it is just something that I appreciate, and I'm sure that we all do. My next question is, in terms of looking at our event, our Healing Illinois Conversation series, and tonight's theme is all around celebrating freedom and celebrating the intersecting identities. As you were, as we invited you and you were preparing for your pieces for today, can you talk a little bit about your process in picking the piece that you wanted to share, and what your process was in picking it, and and selecting it and sharing it. So a little bit about specifically your journey about the piece that you shared today. And who would like to go first?
I can just go first. I actually walked into the room and I had some things, and I actually just touched everything. Like I opened the jars, I touched the wood, I sometimes I like just, and I was just thinking about, oh, what does this make me feel? What did I feel like when I bought it? What did I think of? What was I feeling? And I want to share that with people, and I wanted to have things that did evoke some emotion and some thought. And so I really love to be able to do that, and hopefully, through explaining the process or what it is, that people can also kind of feel what I'm feeling as well. And so I just had the things that gave me the strongest feelings that I could really describe to others, and that brought me so much joy, and I wanted to share. So that's how I picked the pieces. I walked into my room, and I've been in the room for a few days thinking about, well, what am I going to show people? A lot of my work, I'm just priming it. And I was like, well, you can show them the process, right? This is, having the cube as part of the process, feeling it and touching it and experiencing that. And then the other things I have here, that's part of the process that I want others to experience too. So that's also why that's why I chose what I chose to bring to show.
Thank you so much for that. And Cathy?
I basically chose my piece when I read the question of the intersectionality between the art and freedom, and something about how it interacts with racism, which is what we're dealing with today. I chose this particular piece because of the metaphoric language. If you were really paying attention to the piece, it talked a lot about darkness. And darkness is a word that represents, you can either have a darkness of feeling, you can have a time when you feel that there's no light, and darkness also represents the way that you can feel in the world when you are a person of color and you feel as though the world is very racist to you, like there's very little light because of being in a systematic racism. So, but the purpose of the poem and the meaning behind the piece is, in spite of the darkness, in spite of the fact that we are but ashes, little tiny specks, because if you've ever been a victim of racism, sometimes you can feel like you're very insignificant in the world when all the power is to the dominant race or to the other race. But yet, we might feel as a tiny speck of an ash, but yet we rise. We rise and we become something greater. And that's also a metaphoric symbolism to the people who come from the inner cities. It has to do with the violence that come from, the urban cities, inner cities, very violent communities, and everybody thinks like that one line, barren, desolate wasteland. Nothing good can grow here because, this is known as a place of violence. But yet, within all of the turbulence and violence, there are people who come out of these communities who are poets and writers and dancers and artists and doctors and lawyers, and they become more than what their environment expects them to be. So that's why the poem is entitled Forget Not What Rises from the Ashes.
Yeah, this is Washieka. I thought it was amazing, but I also was thinking about as, like, for instance, an unambiguously Black person, like what darkness means, and that traditional association, darker skin and badness or ill concepts. And also when you said about rising from the ashes, I actually have a Black Phoenix tattoo, on my leg, and that's why I have it, right? I've gone through so many things as, a woman with so many different identities. I think a lot of us have, when we have so many identities within us that work for and or against us at times, and yet we are still finding ways to create, to be present, to exceed even our wildest ambitions, not just our wildest dreams. And that really resonated with me for that reason.
I am so happy to hear that. Thank you for sharing that, because that was the other aspect of darkness. It did represent the darker skinned sister or brother, the darker skinned people, the Afrocentric people, the ancestors, and what are contributions to the world. You are exactly right. That is also all intermingled within that one poem. But the beauty of art is that once the artist releases the poem, whatever I meant it to be, once it's released to the world, the reader gets an entirely different meaning from it, or an entirely different dynamic. It means so many things to different people. And it never means, it might not mean what I mean it to mean when I wrote it, but that's what I love about the art. It's like a mother who raises her children, and then once you release the children out into the world, they have become their own beings. You raise them, but who they are and what they do is totally up to them, and you just get a chance to watch them thrive. So my poems are like my babies, but once my babies grow up and are released from the nest, they do what they do. So thank you so much for saying that. But it all of that, it's to show the intersectionality between our color and our ambitions, and it doesn't matter where we live. Um, it doesn't have to be significant as to what we're going to be. We can overcome various obstacles of redlining. It shouldn't matter where you live, what you're able to become. There are great people that have come out of barren, desolate wastelands, and sometimes I think that it's within the struggle, because we are in that barren, desolate wasteland, that makes us who we are.
This is Jejin. Thank you both again for your thoughtfulness and just your sharing of your art and your process. There's just a lot there for us to think about. In and forgive me, I'm not sure if it's just because it's around dinner time, but my analogy, as I hear you both talk about your processes and your art, I had this image of how your different ways of how you're feeding people through the words and the messages and the ideas in your poetry, Cathy, of how it feeds and nourishes the mind and the spirit and encourages thought and contemplation as well as joy. And Washieka, in your pieces of exploring, of you actually doing activities and making food to actually nourish people's bodies, but also in your creative process of encouraging people to get involved in feeling textures and patterns and moving beyond just one sense, but engaging the all their senses of feeling and hearing and seeing and smelling and tasting, and how that can, also nourish and feed the soul, but also in some of the direct ways of preparing food and sharing food, and the creativity behind all of that is also nourishing bodies. And it's I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but it's just some reflections that came to mind as I was listening to you both. As I've said, and just as much as I would like to continue kind of monopolizing time, I do want to transition into opening up this conversation for all the attendees. But I also want to give a few minutes as a little break for people to process all that we've taken in and all that you've shared so far. So it is about 6:49, 6:50. If we can take, say, a 4-minute break, yeah, 3 or 4-minute break, and come back at, say, 6:54-ish. And then when we come back, we'll open it up to questions and comments from our lovely attendees. So take a few minutes to breathe, stretch, and for our attendees, think about some wonderful questions that you want to ask our wonderful artists. And we'll be back in 4 minutes. All righty. Hi, everybody. It is 6:54, and we can come back together. And again, it's been a really enlightening and for me, a really a great experience to hear all these artists over our time. And I'm just learning about art, and also remembering that, you know, our whole conversation series is all around how art and creativity can and is connected to expanding the conversation around racial inequality, and looking and fighting and working toward more racial equity and justice and fairness. And I think for those of us also in the disability community and who also identify as being members of communities of color, it's an important conversation, and it is also an important to really work toward raising awareness for one, and increasing representation and raising our voices to say that we're part of these communities as well. And, you know, finding ways of sharing our experiences and connecting to larger communities. And I think using art and artistic expression is a way of bringing those ideas and messages and voices to the larger community in a way that is hopefully, and from my perspective, also in a more welcoming way. With that said, again, I just like to now move on to our open discussion and Q&A, and acknowledge one of our partners at UIC, Rhonda, who's been very wonderful in helping to monitor our chat. If you have questions, comments, please put them in the chat. If you are also interested and would like to come on mic, you can also use the raise your hand feature, which you could find at the bottom of the Zoom window. On the right side, there's a little thing you can say raise your hand, and we'll see that, and we can let you on. You can come on mic and ask your question that way. But I just wanted to also share that there was a very nice message in the chat expressing gratitude to both you, Cathy, and Washieka, for your sharing your experiences and also sharing your journey to your art. That was a very meaningful for them to hear that as well. And apologize for my ineloquence at the moment. So any questions from our audience?
This is Rhonda. Thank you, Jay. And I also want to thank Cathy and Washieka. It is great to have you both with us today. And it is so empowering and beautiful to hear about your journey and how your work addresses race and disability. We do have a couple of questions. The first question is, what were some challenges that you had to overcome as artists? And in general, do you think that there's enough support for disabled artists, especially if they want to amplify their work?
Which one of us are you asking the question to?
So this is for both of you.
Okay. I don't feel like this is Cathy Saunders speaking, first of all. I don't feel like there's enough support for artists in general. And I honestly think that there's not much support for disabled artists unless you are a part of a community. I've gotten a lot of support for my art due to advocacy, due to working with community organizations like Illinois Imagines, Access Living, also working with the Bureau Institute of Justice. So because I'm part of the advocacy movement, my art is featured as often, asked to could it if it could be used within different conversations or different meetings where they're working with survivors or working with training for facilitation of especially prevention of violence and domestic abuse and sexual abuse. So if you're working with the organization, yes, there's a room and a space for your art, but I don't see very much support for disabled artists in the overall community. But I'm not saying that as a negative. I think it's changing now because I do see like there are more children involved with disabilities involved in ballet or other art mediums. I see a lot of that through the media. Channel 11 has a lot of artistic venues, so I think it is changing. Also, in the African American community, we've always had like the DuSable Museum of African American History, the ETA Theater. Those are neighborhood theaters and neighborhood museums that feature the contributions of African Americans. So I think it is changing, but it's not enough of it outside of the confines of working in advocacy or working within an organization. I'm really hoping that at some point it will just be part of the community. Like when they have art fairs, we can all just come to the art fair and hopefully it's accessible. I don't really say I'm a disabled artist, but I do identify with the disability community. I do identify as a woman with a disability, but I'm a poet and a writer. I don't really focus on disability when I'm writing or being poetry, but it is part of my identity. But I just feel like I should be part of the mainstream of you're a poet, you're a writer, so you're in with everyone else. I think there should be working towards full inclusion.
I agree. There's definitely not enough funding. And one big issue is because art is definitely not a valued medium, even when it's necessary. I saw a post that said, don't forget when the pandemic hit, we turned to artists for comfort. And, there's various different arts like acting, and then the Met put on shows that people could see for free. And there was so much art being made and created. And even, during protests, there's protest art, which is amazing. And I think all art is political, right? So I think that the things that I'm creating are also important because you don't see a lot of Black home decor people. There are people who do home decor who aren't Black, and their work is, I'm not saying it's bad or anything, but it is hard to get into home decor as a Black person. One big thing is money. So I can't just pitch Black home decor and then I have investors lined up, people who want to support and help me create that kind of buzz. I don't have a marketing team. I don't have any of those types of connections in place. I don't know other Black people in home decor. There are Black home decor companies, but I don't actually know any of those people. We're fairly spread apart. We do very different things. So the type of home decor I do, some people do candles, some people do scarves and pillows and sheets. I don't do any of that. So breaking into the particular type of home decor I want to do is also really difficult. So being able to save and things like that has been, it is definitely a challenge. So I definitely think that artists don't get enough funding. I do think that there are certain pools of money and they go to certain groups of people, but people of color and disabled artists, it's much harder. I have been wanting to go to craft fairs, but it's hard. I can't take a hand truck on the bus. I don't drive. Getting a car or getting someone to help me go to a craft fair is going to be exponentially expensive. And if I want to store my things nearby, or if I want to sell online and I want to ship, then I have to go to the post office. I live on the third floor of a 3-story walk up. And I live more than a mile from my local post office. So going through that, especially with the Chicago weather and the way the weather changes, and all of those kinds of difficulties compound, the financial and the access. And oh, there may be a market. There's a market that is sort of close to me, but they're only doing food there because they're mostly a farmer's market that only does food. Or there is a market and but there's a cost, right? And you have to bring your own table, your own chairs, or you're in the sun, or you're in some kind of intermittent wet, bad weather. And so there's these definite challenges that stack up. And then these same organizations say art is for everyone, without an ounce of irony, by the way. And so for me, I do definitely think art is very undervalued, even when it's needed. And I think it's always needed. I do think all art is political in some way because you also have to think about the funding aspects and where that money's coming from, where it's going, and what it represents. So yeah, that's my long answer to that question.
And I also want to say that my book got published with the help of someone who was an international trainer for sexual violence against people with disabilities. And I worked with this particular person for about 10 years as an advocate, and I learned different things under her and trained under her. So after doing the training to become an advocate, then because I was writing poetry and people were responding to my poetry as a healing medium, she helped me to get my poetry together and showed me how to put it in a book and how to get it online and how to get a barcode, and she helped me to publish it. So a lot of times the good thing about working in advocacy and being an activist and an advocate is that when you do that work and people see your dedication, if they see you use art as a medium, then they may assist you for using it for that medium of sexual violence and abuse. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we also need other mediums to get our poetry out, not just in that one medium of prevention of violence and abuse. I would like to be able to go into communities of color and be able to have book fairs and sell my books, or find out if there are any other publishers that will publish poetry that have other subject matters other than violence and abuse. Because I have poems on a variety of subjects, but I can write on anything that I've studied about or interested in. So when I saw the need for poetry in the arena of prevention sexual violence and abuse and making people aware of the fact that abuse was very, very rampant against people with disabilities, and there's a need for art as a healing medium, that was a plus for me. But I'd like to see that same thing occurring in other genres.
I definitely agree. I just emailed or just sent out a blast about a book that I'm doing, a coloring book that I'm publishing through like this small indie publishing company, and it has been so difficult. There have been so many hurdles, and the type of book I'm making, a lot of people don't publish on that site, and getting the ISBN was a problem actually for me, and so it's finally kind of ready on the website, but I don't have enough money to actually publish it. To publish a copy. So I'm doing pre-orders with the hopes that I get enough pre-orders that I can actually, publish this book and put it out into the world and maybe have small indie bookstores carry it. So, and that's been difficult. That process has been difficult. This was an idea over a year in the making, and it's finally come to kind of like the very last little hurdle, and it's just so hard to get there.
That sponsorship is really, really needed. But I think one of the problems is that I'm a little older than most, but when I was in school, art was a big part of school, whether you did like theater or whether you wrote for the school newspaper or whether you did different kind of arts in art class or wood shop. And I've noticed in recent years, at least in the Chicago public school system, the art is not considered valuable anymore. So they've taken a lot of art out of school, and like you said, it's not. It is political. I believe they've removed it because it's not considered important enough as part of the curriculum. But yet, when we go through pandemics or we go through world hunger or any kind of crisis that we go through as a country, I've noticed that the first people that actually step up are always the artists, the musicians, to heal and be able to give people hope.
Hi, yeah, this is Chechen, and I think there's a lot of truth to that, as Cathy is saying, that art and creativity has and does play a very important role in sustaining all of us through difficult times. And clearly, looking back, as both of you have mentioned throughout at times in this conversation, looking back at this past year of all of us in the world, looking and dealing with with COVID, there have been a lot of the moments and examples of optimism or messages of hope or community have been connected to creative expression. I wanted to ask, because considering again tonight's theme of celebrating intersecting identities and how disability identity is connected to gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, race, age, and all the different identities that are out there. From your perspective, what role does art have in addressing this intersectionality, and how do you interpret art's role in whatever way that is for you in addressing this intersection?
I can start. I think that for me, it's more than just about visibility. And I think that even though it's Pride Month, a lot of people participate in these kind of corporate shows of pride. And then someone actually pointed out a contradiction that many companies will actually have multiple branches of their own social media page. So one branch will have pride stuff and things like that for different months, Black History, Native American history, Italian history, like all these different months. But they'll have in other countries that are not open to those kinds of ideas or they're not familiar with those concepts, they'll just have their regular branding, their regular logos. And I think that's something that we do have to be aware of. I'm sorry, my cat is like climbing on stuff and knocking stuff down. That we do have to be aware of those things. And for me, as an Afro-Latina, I want people to not only see, when they see something that is made by a Black person, not just say, oh, that's something a Black person made, as if Black people are a monolith. I want there to be a richness and an investigation into the different types of Blackness and different types of art forms in Blackness. So for me, that doesn't mean, for instance, I'm not terribly fond of Tyler Perry films. I don't like the messages, but I don't mind them as long as there are these longer, broader, not broad, but like more in-depth representations of African Americans, of Afro-Latinx people, of people of the entire diaspora. And that, of course, includes queer Black people. That, of course, includes disabled Black people, trans Black people, because not all trans people consider themselves queer, not all queer people are trans. I want art to move, right? I think my when I see my art, I want it to move people. I want it to go somewhere and do something. And I think that having more, not just more just general broad strokes representation, but having specific experiences, themes, ideas explored through different forms of art, whether that's dance, whether that is spoken word, whether that is through television even radio. I have a friend who still makes radio plays, and I still listen to things on the radio too. Those different types of expressions in these areas. Maybe there are a lot of Black people in a certain medium. There can still be more, right? And maybe there aren't a lot. And how do we make, how do we say, oh, well, this person wants to do this. How do we make that become a reality? So I think for me, it's not just about, oh, this person is here. Oh, look at this person, because that leads to tokenization. It's look at these people, look at the variations. So we're talking about disability, variations in bodies and variations in the ways people move and act and think and create. And how do we not only show that, but center that person's experience, knowledge, and have them be the driving force to help create and sustain that change.
This is Cathy, and I totally agree with what Washieka has stated. And in terms of the LBTG community, I'm an ally. I have friends and family members that are identified with those communities. But I'm going to share a little history here that the LGBTQ community have always been around, and they've always been an integral part of our history, but unfortunately they have not always been recognized. People might not know that the organizer of the civil rights movement back in 1965 was actually an LGBTQ gentleman by the name of Bayard Rustin. And Dr. Martin Luther King actually asked him to help organize the civil rights movement, because he was a very bright individual, and he studied at Wilberforce University. Unfortunately, though, because I guess the times, he didn't get the recognition, and it wasn't safe to come out at the time. But he was the driving force of the actual civil rights movement march on Washington. And I will say this, that in the genre of poetry, there is and has always been people of color that identify as LGBTQ. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, either Langston Hughes or James Baldwin were of that persuasion. I could be wrong. I'm not for sure. But I know that during the Harlem Renaissance, which is our history, where African Americans became very well defined, more of our art was being more recognized during that time. During that time, a lot of artists met and did their art in the Harlem Renaissance, and a lot of them identified, but I guess they were closeted at the time, but they were identified as LGBTQ, and many of them were writers and authors and poets, as well as dancers. And all I'm saying is that they've always been around, and I am always an ally.
Also, I know that. Oh, sorry, this is Chic again. There's also 2 questions in the chat, and I wanted to address them. So Elizabeth had asked about how I imagine my audience interacting with my art in dynamic and creative ways. Well, one, I hope they, the smaller pieces, like for instance, the cube that I'm working on, I hope they take it with them, and I hope that they can use it when they feel anxious or any need to. And I hope they find places to put it in their home, or to put all my pieces in their home in a place that they're interacting with. So if I'm making a tray, for instance, you can use it as a jewelry tray, a breakfast tray, all these other kinds of things, and you can interact with it on a daily basis. And when you're going to interact with the different parts of it. You're going to see it, you're going to feel it. And I want that to be something, I want people to interact with the things that they have in their home. I don't want something to just be a showpiece that is really beautiful. I like that, but I also like the interactive nature, and I think that's part of the whole form and function kind of thing. It should have a function and it should be good, but it also should have a form, and I feel that is in some ways lost depending on the type of style people embrace. So say you embrace monochrome colors, where you can still have a monochrome color palette that is beautiful and interactive, right? It doesn't have to be stagnant. So that's kind of the thing. I want people to interact, and I want people to feel what I felt while I'm working with it. So I do want them to feel the wood grain. I want them to feel the pearls. I want them to, you know, I don't want it to just be one sense. I don't want it to be like just a one sensory dimension. I want it to be multiple sensory dimensions. I want them to think about how this was made. And I remember reading this thing a long time ago when I was getting my first master's about Roland Barthes talking about wooden toys versus like plastic toys. And I thought about that too. And maybe that's why I like the medium of wood so much. But I really do like the idea of like using in things with wood rather than like plastic or metal or glass or cloth. Those aren't mediums I typically work in. I know the other question was from TJ, and it was how do disabled people of color embrace the food they eat from their motherland or their mother cultures while making it accessible, because some people can't enjoy ethnic food like soul food because of medical conditions or allergies. I love this question because I actually know the answer. So there are actually a lot of Black vegans who have been doing amazing dynamic work transforming their cuisine. So there are a lot of African Americans, but also Afro Caribbeans. So there are a number of people who are adjusting, finding and experimenting with not just food types, but textures, flavors, colors. A lot of what I've been seeing with vegan soul food by Black people and Afro Caribbean people is to ensure that it still looks the same. That's another thing. The aesthetic of your mother culture, the aesthetic of your personal ethnic cuisine. How do we maintain that? How do we keep that? For instance, I can't have certain types of rice anymore, right? Parboiled, I can have parboiled rice. I'm not eating cauliflower rice as rice. It's not rice to me. So I'll have parboiled rice rather than just regular white rice. Or if I can't have potatoes, I can have yuca, right? And so those things still connect me to my cultures, but they make there's still the room of what I can and they're within the realm of what I can and can't eat. So if you're interested, you can look up. I know Tabitha Brown is a well-known Black vegan, but you can look up other Black vegan people, Black vegan Caribbeans, or any kind of people who are doing vegan work in your culture, and you can look at there's many books about it, and you can look up reviews, how people feel, and experiment yourself as well. So I would definitely encourage experimentation, because there are a number of people who do have allergies. So my brother right now is not supposed to have dairy, so for a few he just cannot have dairy. So I was like, well, there's a brand, and I know this. There was another Black woman who was making mac and cheese, and she can't have dairy either. And she made this baked mac and cheese, and she actually walked us through the process of how to use this vegan cheese, that vegan cheese, do you use this type of milk alternative, and the texture was the same, and she's like, this is how it tastes and things like that. What spices to use to kind of mimic this flavor combination, and it was amazing. So I think that that's also great. Looking to people within the community who are already kind of doing that. Work of substitutions and rearrangements of food flavors and textures and tastes.
This is Cathy. I'm also African American, and in my family, I have several other cultures. Like there's Native American, from India rather, and then I have Jamaicans, and we've been doing that for years, just substituting what we can't have for healthier alternatives. Like I'll just give an example. Years ago, African Americans used a lot of pork and fat meat in their greens in their diet, partially because it was what we could afford. And throughout our history, we ate a lot of pork. But now, with a lot of people having diabetes and other heart problems and different issues going on with their bodies, we're eating less pork. We're substituting more turkey in our greens. Also, I know one person that I know that actually uses chicken broth on the greens for flavor. So there's all kinds of substitutes that you can do, and we've been doing them. I can't have dairy a lot either, so I've learned to drink almond milk, because almond milk is both gluten-free, dairy-free, vegan-friendly. So it's just a matter of finding what works for you. But the thing that I know is hard on a lot of people of their economic background is that these foods that are substitutions are also very high for them economically and doesn't fit in their budget um, when they have, maybe on government assistance with their food or whatever. So we do try to utilize things that are cost effective as well as healthy. And basically, what you can do is the things that you know you like and you need for your body, you watch to see when and if they go on sale, and then you get coupons from the store, and then that way you can eat healthy and still have what the flavors that you like, but have a healthier alternative for your body so that you can live longer and be healthier. But I find that we also have to teach people how to budget their money so they can have the things they need and be able to enjoy their food and still appreciate their culture without depleting their finances.
Yes, this is JJ, and thank you again. There's a lot of really good information and thoughtfulness, and yeah, some feedback and things to help us all reflect on our relationship with food. So as we're winding down our time, I have just again want to thank both of you for being with us again today. And again, reflecting back on tonight's theme of celebrating intersection of identities, I want to ask you just a very simple question. From your perspective and the identities and the intersections and identities that you live in, what brings you joy? What is something that about all the identities and who you are and how you identify, each of you, Washieka and Cathy, what brings you joy about your identities?
I guess I'll start. This is Cathy speaking. What brings me joy about my identities, I identify as a person of color, I identify as a female, and I identify as a person with a disability. And what brings me joy is reading through the history or acknowledging the histories of the triumphs that our people from these various identities have made in spite of the hardship. We've come so far, for instance, with the disability community. I can remember when the ADA was not law yet, and we fought for that access living. Now it's law, and we're fighting to make sure it's enforced. But at least during my lifetime, we got it on the books. So I feel like seeing these things um, develop themselves throughout history. And of course, women, from the suffrage movement, Women's History Month in March, Black women have made tremendous strides. We now have an African American vice president. So that is second to the highest office in the land. And I am so happy that now there are little Black girls that can actually say, I want to be president, and know that it's actually attainable because they already see someone like themselves who looks like them, talks like them, has the same or different ethnicities, but is in a minority just like they are, and she has made it. They have seen women like Michelle Obama, who is an African American lawyer and wife, first lady of a president. So I'm so happy that this generation is seeing things now that I didn't see as a child growing up in the 70s. Not saying the 70s and 80s were bad, but I guess the time was not then, but time is now. So at least it's happening within our lifetime. And then identifying as a woman, a person of color, and a person with a disability from the time of, because I grew up in a time of the 60s and 70s, where when people were migrating, Black people were able to go to school now, and there was, the affirmative action gave you opportunities that you didn't have before. So even though it's not perfect, and even though it's still got a lot of flaws in the system, I saw when I went away to college, I was one of the first ones in my family to go with a disability, and I saw African American professors. I saw African American chancellors, African American teachers' assistants, and people from Africa who actually coming from the motherland who had not students in school but had positions in the university. So the time is so much brighter now for our people. But as we learn, as we grow, I don't want to just monopolize the conversation as African American, even though we're talking about our intersectionality as women of color with disabilities. There are other minorities, such as Asian and, uh, the Latina and other minorities. When we thrive and survive and thrive and move forward, so does every other minority. So I'm so happy to see that. We just need to have a nation that is living up to its creed. And before I get off of this question or comment, there's a book that I just read that I really want people to, because I think the author of this book really speaks to what we're talking about. She did not have a disability, but she was a woman of color. Cicely Tyson was a great African American actress who recently died. She lived to be 94 years old, I believe, but she was raised from the Great Depression to, the new millennium. So she's seen a lifetime of things, and her memoir is excellent to read. It's called Just As I Am. It's a beautiful book, and it talks about her using her platform of art as a way to fight for social justice and change. She did not take any roles that she felt would be undermining or um, detrimental to African American psyches, but she was not afraid to take on the role as a maid. But even then, her way of portraying the maid, she was always a smart, intelligent person that had a lot of depth. So I would profusely ask that if you really want to be inspired and you are a woman of color or even a man of color, if you're looking for an interesting read, the memoir of Cicely Tyson, Just As I Am, is a great. She talks about the pandemic. She talks about racism. She talks about activism. And she's lived through 60 years of presidents and political change. So in order to know where we're going, we have to know where we've been. So I'm very much a historian as well.
Thank you, Cathy. There's a lot to be joyful and celebrate. Washieka, what brings you joy?
I would say a couple of things. I think the support that I get from my families and friends, I think it's so encouraging. And I'm telling you, like, for instance, the coloring book, it was just this idea I had, I think 3 a.m, and I messaged my friend, and it was 4 a.m for her because she was in New York. I was like, I just want to share this with somebody who I know is not going to try and take the idea as their own, but is going to understand why this is important and understand why I have this idea. And she's like, yes, I love it. I'm going to buy 3 copies or something like that. And I just was like, yeah, and it was always in the back of my mind. So I think thinking about what's needed and how I kind of can fulfill that, but also find creativity. But I think another big thing is being in spaces that celebrate my identities, right? Not just as a Black woman, not just as a fat woman, not just as a queer woman, not just as a disabled woman, not just as a, like that celebrates my identities together and not separately. Because I have been to events that celebrate me as a woman, but not celebrate my African Americanness, or celebrate me as a Black woman, but not necessarily other aspects of my identity. And so And, there's a lot of spaces, and even in disability spaces, there are some that are very limiting in terms of how they represent identity and how they celebrate identity. And so being in a space that will celebrate all of my identities is really important to me. And I've learned that that's more important more and more, not just to foster my creativity, but to reaffirm my sense of self, to be happy and to find joy in all of the, in all of the strife and in all of the struggles, the beauty and the innovation in the community. And that's what really keeps me going. It's really the community, and seeing myself in the community is important, because there were times when I didn't. And so seeing myself in the community has been one of the most joyous things I have felt in a very long time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to both of you. And again, and as we wind down, I just want to share the wrong thing. Again, as we wind down, just thank you both so much for being part of our event, our celebration tonight. And I think, again, I just wanted to thank everybody as we wind down. Thank you for both for being here and sharing your art and your creativity, and kind of finishing up our series with a celebration of art and recognizing the importance of celebrating our histories, our identities. As we close out, I just want to give appreciation and recognition to all our partners, the University of Illinois Chicago's Institute on Disability and Human Development, Chicagoland Disabled People of Color Coalition, the School of the Art Institute, the Disability Cultural Activism Lab at the School of the Art Institute, Access Living, Chicago Community Trust, and Healing Illinois for their generous support and the grant. And a special thanks to Rhonda for her help with the tech and the background and monitoring the chat, Timotheus TJ Gordon for his co-facilitation and leadership in organizing this event, as well as thanks to Sandy Yee at the Art Institute for her leadership and decal work, and Dr. Kelly Shea at the Institute of Disability and Development for her help and support in this project as well. So with all of that, again, thank you all for being here. I apologize for going a little bit longer, but it has been a real privilege to learn from all of you. And with all of that, with appreciation, I hope you have a great night and take time to appreciate art and to celebrate who we are. So thank you all.
Thank you.